The grand ballroom of the Silvermane estate was a masterpiece of oppressive beauty. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the polished floor below, each facet a tiny prison reflecting the same calculated scene. The air itself was thick, a heavy tapestry woven from the cloying perfumes of ambitious omegas and the rich, self-satisfied scent of powerful alphas. It was a symphony of influence, and Kael, as the Alpha Heir, was its reluctant conductor. He stood with a practiced ease, a crystal goblet of untouched wine in his hand, his expression a mask of polite detachment. He had performed this role for years, a prize stallion on display for the most advantageous bidder. Tonight, the expected bidder was Lyra, her beauty as sharp and cold as cut glass, her family's lands a perfect puzzle piece to complete the Silvermane territory. His father's approving glances from across the room were a constant reminder of the duty that lay before him, a future preordained and suffocating. Yet, his gaze, as it had so often lately, strayed from the glittering center of the room. It traveled over the heads of the preening crowd, past the swirl of silk and the flash of jewels, to find its rest in the quietest corner, near the archway that led out to the moonlit gardens. There, seated on a small, plain chair that seemed like an afterthought, was Lyra. She was the pack's open secret, its rejected omega. The title was not official, but it was universally understood. Where the other omegas were vibrant and potent, she was a study in muted tones. Her dress was simple, her posture withdrawn. Her scent, which most in the pack dismissively termed broken or weak, was a subtle whisper of rain-softened earth and parchment. To Kael, in this room of overwhelming sensory assault, it was the only note that felt authentic, a breath of cool, clean air, a memory surfaced, unbidden. A younger version of himself finding a girl crying by the stream, her sketchbook abandoned beside her. He had scared away the betas teasing her for her quietness. She had not thanked him with effusive words, but had instead shown him her drawings. The pages filled with astonishingly detailed renderings of a beetle's shell, the pattern of moss on a stone, the fragile architecture of a fallen nest. She saw a world the rest of them, in their brutal simplicity, blindly marched over. That girl was now this woman, and the heir who had comforted her was now a man trapped by the very world that rejected her. The dissonance was a physical ache. In his chest, his father's voice, a low and impatient rumble, sounded at his elbow. Kael, Lyra is waiting. This hesitation serves no one. It is time to make your choice. It is time to be the alpha you are destined to be. The words were the final lock on a door he had been rattling for years. To be the alpha was to choose power, to choose strategy, to choose a cold and beautiful queen for a cold and beautiful throne. He looked at Lyra, her smile a perfectly crafted weapon. He saw the future there, a long, polished corridor of duty without warmth, of respect without love. Then he looked at Lyra. He saw the quiet dignity in the line of her shoulders. He saw the profound and unappreciated strength it took to endure a lifetime of rejection without becoming cruel. He did not see a liability. He saw the only real thing in the entire manufactured evening. The noise of the ballroom faded into a distant hum. The weight of centuries of tradition, the pressure of his father's will, the expectations of every single person in the room, all of it crumbled away under the sheer, simple clarity of what he had to do. He set the goblet down on a passing tray, with a decisive click that sounded like a key turning, and he walked. He moved through the crowd, and a ripple of confusion followed in his wake. He was moving away from the center, away from Lyra, away from his destiny. A path cleared before him, not out of respect, but out of sheer bewildered astonishment. He heard the whispers break out, saw his father's face shift from confidence to confusion to dawning fury. He registered none of it. His world had narrowed to the woman in the corner, who now watched his approach with wide, startled eyes. She began to rise, a flush of embarrassment on her cheeks, believing he was finally coming to ask her to leave, to remove the inconvenient stain from their perfect evening. He dropped to one knee before her. The gasps that echoed through the ballroom were a collective shockwave. An Alpha Heir did not kneel. He took her small, trembling hand in his. Her skin was cool against his palm. "Lyra," he said, his voice not a shout but a clear, unwavering force that carried to the farthest corner of the silent room. "I have been a blind fool. I have searched for strength in all the loud and obvious places, while the truest strength has been sitting here in quiet grace all along." Tears welled in her gray eyes, shimmering in the light, but she did not look away. You have endured cruelty with kindness and rejection with dignity. That is the power I want by my side. That is the heart I want to lead with." He took a breath, the words feeling like his first true act as an alpha. "I do not want a prize. I want a partner. I choose you." The silence that followed was absolute, a void of utter disbelief. And in the center of it, a single tear traced a path down Lyra's cheek, followed by the most radiant, breathtaking smile he had ever seen. It was the sun finally breaking through a lifetime of clouds. "You chose me?" Her voice was a whisper. "A fragile, hopeful thing. I chose you," he affirmed, his voice thick with an emotion he had long suppressed. He brought her hand to his lips, a seal upon his vow. "At last. Of course." Here is chapter 2. The silence that had followed Kael's declaration did not last. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one a sharp fragment of scandalized whisper, outraged murmur, and disbelieving gasp. The ballroom, once a scene of orchestrated elegance, became a vortex of chaos. Kael remained on one knee, holding Lyra's hand, an island of stillness in the raging sea of their society's disapproval. He rose then, drawing her up with him. Her fingers were ice cold and trembling within his, but she did not pull away. She seemed to be in a state of shock, her wide gray eyes scanning the hostile faces around them as if she were viewing the scene from a great distance. He could feel the fine tremor that ran through her entire frame, a violin string stretched to its breaking point. He tightened his grip, a silent promise of anchor. The first to reach them was his father, Alpha Heir. The man's presence was a thundercloud, his usually composed features twisted by a fury so potent it altered the very air around them, making it difficult to breathe. His voice, when he spoke, was a low and vicious growl meant for Kael's ears alone. "Have you lost your mind? You will undo this. Now." The command was absolute, the voice that had governed Kael's entire life. Kael met his father's gaze, and for the first time, he did not see his alpha. He saw a man afraid of a broken system. "It is done," Kael stated, his own voice quiet, but impregnable. "The choice is made. It is binding." "Binding?" Thorin spat the word. "You have bound us to weakness. You have spat upon a generation's-old alliance for a shadow. She is nothing." Kael felt Lyra flinch as if struck. He moved instinctively, shifting his body to shield her from his father's venom. "You are mistaken," Kael said, his tone dropping into something colder, more dangerous. "You speak of the future Luna of this pack. You will afford her the respect the title demands." The challenge in his words was unmistakable. It was not a challenge for dominance, not yet, but a line drawn in the sand of the polished marble floor. Thorin's eyes flashed with understanding and a flicker of something that might have been grudging respect for the sheer audacity of it. With a final, searing glance of contempt aimed at Lyra, he turned and strode away, his departure doing little to quell the rising tide of gossip. Then came the others. Alar's approach was a study in icy fury. Her beautiful face was a mask, but her eyes burned with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. She did not address Kael. Instead, she looked directly at Lyra, her voice a silken poison. "A momentary lapse in judgment," she said, her smile a cruel, thin line. "He will come to his senses. They always do. And you will be returned to your corner, where you belong. Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. It will be terribly brief." Before Lyra could even form a response, Kael stepped forward, his presence suddenly immense and intimidating. "You will remove yourself from her presence," he instructed Lyra, his voice devoid of all warmth. "You are addressing my chosen, your future Luna. Remember your place." Lyra's mask finally cracked, revealing the raw fury beneath. She turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd, leaving a wake of bitter perfume and promised retaliation. The walk from the ballroom was a gauntlet. Every eye followed them, every whisper felt like a physical blow. Kael kept Lyra close to his side, his arm a firm barricade against the world. He could feel the weight of her confusion, her fear, a palpable force radiating from her. She was silent, her head bowed, as if trying to make herself small enough to escape the notice of the predators circling them. He did not take her to the opulent guest wings where honored omegas were usually housed. He led her to a suite of rooms adjacent to his own, rooms that had long stood empty. They were spacious and well-appointed, but carried a sense of solemn stillness. Once the heavy oak door closed behind them, muting the cacophony of the outside world, the true magnitude of what he had done settled upon them both. The silence in the room was heavy, fraught with unspoken questions. Lyra stood in the center of the sitting room, looking small and lost amidst the grandeur. She wrapped her arms around herself, finally pulling her hand from his. Why? The word was a broken whisper, barely audible. Why would you do that? They all hate me now more than ever. And your father? Because it was the only truth in that entire room, Kael answered, his voice softer now. He wanted to reach for her again, but he sensed she needed space, a moment to breathe. I could not choose. A lie. She finally looked at him, her eyes searching his for some hint of deception, of mockery. She found none. They will never accept me. I am not what a Luna should be. You are exactly what a Luna should be, he countered firmly. They have simply forgotten what the word truly means. We will remind them. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. At Kael's command, his most trusted beta, Gareth, entered. The man was a mountain of quiet strength, his loyalty to Kael absolute. His eyes flickered to Lyra with curiosity but no judgment. Gareth, Kael said, this is Lyra, your future Luna. From this moment on, your primary duty is to be her shadow. Your life for hers. You answer to her as you answer to me. Is that understood? Gareth dipped his head in a deep nod of respect, first to Kael, then to Lyra. It is understood, Alpha. My life for hers. His presence was a tangible promise of safety. When Gareth took his post outside the door, the room lapsed back into silence. Kael turned to Lyra. The fear in her eyes had not vanished, but it was now shared with a dawning, bewildered awe. I know this is overwhelming, he said. I know I have asked you to walk a path you never chose. You have every right to be afraid, but you will not walk it alone. I give you my word. Lyra looked from him to the door where Gareth stood guard, a symbol of the terrifying new reality. She was a prisoner of a choice she did not make, yet her jailer was offering her not a key, but his hand. The path ahead was shrouded in mist and threat, but for the first time in her lonely life, she was not standing at the edge of it by herself. She simply nodded, the gesture heavy with unspoken terror and a fragile, trembling sliver of hope. The morning after the ball dawned with a brittle silence over the Silvermane manor. The grandeur of the previous evening had curdled into a hangover of resentment and wary curiosity. For Lyra, waking in the lavish suite was a disorienting experience. The softness of the bed, the richness of the fabrics, all felt alien and accusatory. She was an imposter in a gilded cage, her every instinct screaming that this comfort was not meant for her and would be taken away. She kept to her rooms for most of the day, the weight of her new title a heavier cloak than her old obscurity. Through the window, she could see the pack going about its business, and she felt the occasional glance thrown up towards her window, quick and furtive. She was the rejected Omega who had been chosen, a paradox that made her a fascinating object of suspicion. Kael, meanwhile, was embroiled in the storm his decision had provoked. His father had summoned him at first light, and their meeting was a cold, tense affair. Thorin's anger had solidified into a frigid disappointment. He spoke of weakened alliances, of political ramifications, of the laughingstock they would become. Kael stood firm, not with the hot-headedness of rebellion, but with the cool, unshakable resolve of a man who had discovered his own North Star. He left his father's study not as a chastened son, but as a rival alpha protecting his claim. He knew, however, that a claim built on a single public declaration was fragile. His bond with Lyra was a title without substance, a country they had both been dropped into without a map. If it was to withstand the pressures arrayed against it, it needed foundations. It needed truth. He found her that afternoon not in her sitting room, but on the small balcony, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the world below. She looked like she wished to become part of the stonework. Would you walk with me? He asked, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it used before. The request was so simple, so devoid of the grandeur and pressure of the ballroom, that it disarmed her. After a hesitant moment, she nodded. He did not take her on a tour of the manor's opulent heart. Instead, he led her outside, away from the judging eyes and the whispering halls. They walked towards the older parts of the territory, where the ancient trees formed a canopy and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was here, away from the architecture of power, that the real architecture of a person could be revealed. He began not with questions of strategy or duty, but with a memory. I remember you used to draw, he said, his hands clasped behind his back as they walked. You showed me once by the stream. The details you captured were astonishing. Lyra glanced at him, surprised he remembered. It passes the time, she said. Softly, her voice almost lost beneath the rustle of leaves. It is more than that, he countered. It is a way of seeing. You see things others overlook. He paused. What do you see when you look at the pack? The question was dangerous, inviting treason, but his tone was not one of testing. It was one of genuine inquiry. She was silent for a long while, gathering her courage. I see a beautiful engine, she said finally, her words careful. It is powerful, and it shines, but an engine needs fuel. It needs care. Sometimes I think we admire the polished steel so much, we forget the people who stoke the fires and grease the gears. It was a profound observation, one that spoke of a deep, untapped understanding of pack dynamics. Kael stopped walking and looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not a weak Omega, but a keen mind that had been given nothing but time to observe from the shadows. Encouraged by his silence, which felt more like listening than any nod could, she continued. She spoke of her life, not with self-pity, but with a stark, simple honesty that was more powerful than any lament. She told him of her parents, kind and low-ranking, taken by a winter fever when she was young. She spoke of the quiet neglect that followed, of being passed over in favor of Omegas with stronger connections, of learning to find solace in books and in the minute details of the natural world. Her strength was not in dominating a room, but in enduring the silence of her own. Kael, in turn, found himself speaking in ways he never had. He spoke of the loneliness of command, of the constant performance of being the heir. He confessed that he often felt like a symbol, a vessel for his father's ambitions and the pack's expectations, and that the man inside had been slowly suffocating. He told her of the pressure to always be the strongest, the smartest, the most decisive, and the exhausting weight of that mask. It was not a courtship. It was not a seduction. It was a mutual dismantling of walls. They were two strangers, sitting on a fallen log in the dappled sunlight, exchanging the secrets of their isolation. The pivotal moment came as they turned back towards the manor. A commotion erupted near the training grounds. A young enforcer, too bold for his own good, had taken a deep gash to his forearm from a practiced blade. The pack medic was busy elsewhere, and the boy was trying to staunch the flow of blood with a dirty cloth, his face pale. Before Kael could bark an order, Lyra was moving. She hurried to the boy's side, her previous shyness gone, replaced by a calm competence. Let me see, she said, her voice firm. She gently moved his hand away and examined the wound. It is clean, but deep. It needs yarrow and cobwebs to staunch the bleeding, then a proper poultice. She looked up at Kael. In my old room, there is a small wooden box under the bed. It has supplies. He sent Gareth at a run. While they waited, Lyra kept pressure on the wound and spoke to the young enforcer in a low, soothing voice, distracting him from the pain. When the box arrived, she worked with efficient, gentle hands, cleaning the wound, applying the herbal paste she quickly mixed, and bandaging it with a deftness that spoke of hidden practice. Kael watched her. He saw the respect in the young enforcer's eyes, no longer looking at the rejected Omega, but at a woman who knew what to do. In that moment, he did not see a political liability or a fragile soul to be protected. He saw a partner. He saw the kind of strength that built things up rather than broke them down. And he understood that his choice the night before had not been an act of rebellion, but one of the most clear-sighted decisions of his life. The first, solid stone of their foundation had been laid. The fragile peace cultivated in the forest sanctuary proved to be just that, fragile. The manor, for all its grandeur, had ears and eyes in every shadow, and the hostility towards Lyra's elevation did not dissipate. It simply learned to speak in a quieter, more insidious language. The open contempt from the ballroom had curdled into a campaign of subtle torments, each one designed to erode her confidence and prove her unfit for the role she now occupied. It began with small things. A tray of food delivered to her rooms would be cold, as if it had been left sitting for hours. The books she had requested from the library would arrive with key pages mysteriously torn out. When she walked the halls with Gareth a solemn shadow behind her, conversations would halt abruptly, only to resume the moment she passed in a buzz of pointed silence. The message was clear. She was an outsider, an unwelcome one. Lyra was the mastermind, though her hands never seemed to touch the mischief herself. Her presence was a constant, subtle poison. She would offer Lyra a compliment on her dress that was really a critique of its simplicity. She would ask seemingly innocent questions about protocol in front of others, questions designed to highlight Lyra's lack of formal training. Each interaction was a tiny cut, a paper slice that stung and bled far more than it should. The culmination came during a gathering in the main hall for the weekly pack address. It was Lyra's first official appearance beside Kael since the ball, and her anxiety was a live wire under her skin. She had chosen her dress with care, a deep blue velvet that made her feel a little less invisible. As she ascended the dais to take her seat beside Kael, the hem of her gown caught on a splintered piece of wood on the step, a splinter that should have been sanded smooth. There was a sickening tear of fabric. She stumbled, not quite falling, but the damage was done. A long rent ran up the side of the skirt, exposing her leg and the simple slip beneath. A wave of titters and poorly concealed laughs rippled through the crowd. Heat flooded Lyra's face, a mortification so complete she wished the floor would swallow her whole. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, not with respect, but with mocking delight. Kael was at her side in an instant, his own face a mask of cold fury. He wrapped his own jacket around her waist, covering the tear, and shot a look towards Gareth, who immediately began a quiet, intense investigation of the steps. But the damage was not to the dress. It was to Lyra's spirit. The incident awakened every deep-seated insecurity she had ever harbored. That night, in the privacy of her rooms, the walls she had begun to lower for Kael slammed back into place. "You see?" she whispered, her voice raw with a pain that went deeper than humiliation. "They are right. I do not belong here. I am a mistake in this world. Every day I am here, I make you look weaker for choosing me." Kael tried to reason with her, to tell her the opinions of small-minded people did not matter. But his words, though meant to comfort, felt like they came from a place of power she could never understand. He could not feel the cumulative weight of a lifetime of those small-minded opinions. Her doubt created a new, painful distance between them. She began to withdraw, to retreat into the silent, fearful girl she had been before he knelt before her. She started taking her meals alone, pleading a headache, and her walks with him became shorter, filled with strained silences. Kael could feel her slipping away, and a helpless frustration grew in him. He could command an army, but he could not command her heart to feel safe. The true turning point arrived not in the manor, but on its outskirts. Lyra, seeking a moment of solitude away from the oppressive atmosphere, had ventured to the edge of the western woods, a place she had always found solace. Gareth followed at a respectful distance. It was there that the subtle campaign turned violently overt. A rogue wolf, mangy and fierce with the wild scent of the mountains on its fur, burst from the tree line. It was not a random attack. Its focus was singular, its intent clear in its snapping jaws and targeted charge. It was heading straight for Lyra. Gareth moved with lightning speed, intercepting the beast with a roar, the two becoming a whirlwind of fur and fury. But the rogue was desperate and strong. The sound of the fight shattered Lyra's melancholy. For a terrifying moment, she froze. But the sight of Gareth, her steadfast protector, grappling with the frenzied animal ignited something primal within her. This was not a social slight. This was a clear and present danger. Her fear for him overpowered her fear for herself. She did not scream. She looked around, her mind, so often filled with sketches and stories, now clicking into a cold, sharp clarity. She seized a heavy, fallen branch, and as the rogue lunged for Gareth's exposed throat, she brought the wood down with all her strength on the animal's flank. It was not a killing blow, but it was a perfect distraction. The rogue yelped in surprise and pain, turning its rage on her for a split second. That was all the opening Gareth needed. He ended the fight with brutal efficiency. The silence that followed was heavy with panting breaths and the iron scent of blood. Gareth stood over the fallen beast, his own arm bleeding from a deep gash. He looked at Lyra, his chest heaving, and in his eyes was not just gratitude, but a new, profound respect. Kael arrived moments later, summoned by the psychic echo of violence and fear through the pack bonds. He took in the scene, the dead rogue, Gareth's wound, and Lyra, standing tall, still clutching her makeshift weapon, her chest rising and falling rapidly, but her gaze steady. He went to her first, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching, hers for injury. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her voice trembling but clear. "I am all right." See to Gareth. In that moment, the last of her walls crumbled not from pressure, but from necessity. The attack had been meant to break her. Instead, it had forged her. She had not cowered. She had fought, for herself, and for someone else. Kael saw the change. In her, the quiet fear was still there, but it was now shared with a hard-won certainty. She had faced a physical threat and had not broken. The whispered cruelties of the manor seemed suddenly small and pathetic in comparison. He pulled her to him, holding her tightly, not to shield her, but in fierce, proud acknowledgement. The vulnerability was still there, a fragile thing between them, but it was no longer a weakness. It had become a bridge. The first true test of their fledgling rule arrived not with the subtle cruelty of whispers, but with the brute force of nature. A savage early winter storm, born in the northern mountains, descended upon the Silvermane territory with a feral intensity. It howled around the manor like a living thing, hurling fists of sleet against the windows and piling deep, impassable drifts against the doors. In its wake, it left a creeping, insidious silence, the kind that spoke of paralyzed travel, frozen pipes, and a terrible, growing stillness in the smaller dwellings on the outskirts of the territory. Then the coughing began. It started with the children, a dry, rattling sound that soon became a chorus of misery echoing through the stone halls. A fever followed, swift and burning, leaving small bodies listless and parents frantic with a fear that was colder than the ice outside. The pack's medic was overwhelmed, racing from one home to another, his supplies dwindling faster than he could replenish them. In the great hall, Kael and his father held council with the senior enforcers. Their concerns were of borders and security. Their maps were spread across the table, strategies discussed for patrol routes through the snow and the potential for rivals to take advantage of their vulnerability. It was a meeting of alphas, dealing with alpha problems. The suffering in the homes around them was a distant, secondary concern, a domestic issue to be addressed after the strategic ones were solved. Lyra listened from her seat beside Kael, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The discussions of patrols and perimeter checks felt abstract, disconnected from the immediate, desperate sounds of coughing she could hear even through the thick walls. She saw the problem not as a breach in a border, but as a breach in the pack's very heart. The engine, as she had once described it to Kael, was seizing. She rose quietly. All eyes turned to her, some with curiosity, others, like thorns, with impatience. The strongest border will mean nothing if there is no one left to defend it, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the talk of tactics. The threat is not out there. It is in here. It is in our children's lungs. Kael looked at her, and in her eyes he saw not uncertainty, but a fierce, determined clarity. He saw the woman who had faced down a rogue wolf. "What would you have us do?" he asked, his tone not challenging but genuinely inquiring. She did not hesitate. She had spent a lifetime observing, and now that knowledge found its purpose. "The cold root cellar in the east wing. It is the warmest place in the manor below stairs. We can move the sickest children there, where we can care for them together. We need to mobilize every able-bodied person who is not on critical patrol. We need to gather every blanket, every free pot, every candle." She turned her gaze to the head cook, an imposing beta woman named Anya. "We need vast quantities of bone broth, not just for food, for steam. It will help them breathe." Then to the head of the household staff. "We need all the clean linen we have, torn into strips for poultices." Finally, she looked back at Kael. "And I need my box, the one from my old room, and access to the still room." Her orders were not given as commands, but as a logical, compassionate plan. She was not usurping authority. She was filling a void it had not seen. Kael did not countermand her. He nodded, his decision immediate. "You have it, everyone. You have your orders from your Luna. See them done." The transformation was astonishing. Under Lyra's direction, the manor's purpose shifted from defense to triage. The great hall, once a place of politics and pageantry, became a hub of organized compassion. Lyra worked tirelessly, her sleeves rolled up, her hands stained with herbs. She moved between the makeshift cots in the cellar, her touch gentle as she placed cooled poultices on small, fevered foreheads, her voice a soft murmur of comfort. She showed the other omegas and mothers how to prepare the treatments, sharing knowledge that had been her private solace. She did not hoard her skill. She empowered them. Under her guidance, they were no longer bystanders. They were healers. The pack saw their rejected omega not as a weakling, but as a reservoir of practical strength they had been too blind to value. Kael was everywhere, a pillar of support. He ensured supplies were delivered. He lifted heavy pots. He spoke with anxious fathers. his presence reinforcing Lyra's authority. But he was following her lead. He was the strength that enabled her compassion to flow unimpeded. For 3 days and nights, the battle was waged not with claws and teeth, but with broth and bandages, with steam and stubborn hope. And slowly, steadily, the tide turned. The rattling coughs softened. The fevers broke. The terrible silence of the storm was replaced by the weary, grateful sounds of recovery. On the 4th day, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, a young mother approached Lyra. Her own child was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. She did not curtsy or offer formal words. She simply took Lyra's hand, tears in her eyes, and pressed her forehead against it. It was a gesture of profound, wordless gratitude, older than any title. In that moment, Lyra was no longer the Luna who had been chosen. She was the Luna who had chosen to act. She had not commanded respect through power or fear. She had earned it through competence and care. She had shown the pack the true meaning of strength, and in doing so, she had not just saved their children. She had begun to truly heal their pack. The crisis had passed. The storm retreated, leaving a world cleansed and blanketed in pristine white. In the manor, the makeshift infirmary was dismantled. The children returned to their homes, healthy and bright-eyed. But the air within the pack had shifted, irrevocably altered. The respect Lyra now commanded was no longer a hesitant offering but a settled fact. She had been tested in the crucible of necessity and had emerged not just unscathed, but essential. This hard-won peace created a new space around them, a private world within the public one they led. The constant pressure, the watchful, often hostile eyes, seemed to have softened. For the first time since his public declaration, Kael felt they could simply breathe. They could simply be. He sought her out one afternoon, finding her not in the library or the stillroom, but in his own private study, a place she had never before ventured. She was examining a book from his shelf, her fingers tracing the embossed title on the spine. She looked up as he entered, a question in her eyes, as if unsure she belonged there. "This is your sanctuary," she said softly, beginning to replace the volume. He crossed the room and stilled her hand. "It is ours," he corrected her, his voice low. "Every room in this place is ours. There are no more borders between us, Lyra. There cannot be." He led her to the large chair by the fire, the one he always sat in to think, and drew her down to sit beside him. The flames cast a warm, dancing light over her features, and in the quiet intimacy of the room, the last vestiges of the Alpha Heir and the rejected Omega finally melted away. What remained was simply a man and a woman, alone together for the first time. He began to speak, not of pack politics or future plans, but of his own heart. He told her of the profound loneliness that had been his constant companion since childhood, isolation that grew in direct proportion to the expectations placed upon him. He confessed that he had often felt like a symbol, a vessel for his father's ambitions, and that the man within had been slowly suffocating under the weight of his title. "I saw you," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the fire, then shifting to her. "I saw you living in your silence, and it was not a prison to you. It was a refuge. You were whole in a way I had never been. You were the only real thing in a world of performances. My choice that night was not an act of rebellion. It was the first authentic act of my life. It was me choosing myself, by choosing you." His vulnerability unlocked her own. Lyra spoke of her fear, not just of the pack's rejection, but of failing him. She confessed her terror that he would wake one morning and see the choice he had made as the mistake everyone had promised it would be. "I am still that girl who hides in corners," she whispered. Kael turned to fully face her, taking both of her hands in his. "You are the woman who stood between a rogue wolf and my most trusted beta. You are the woman who organized a panic pack and saved its children with her two hands and her knowledge. You are the woman who faced down a visiting alpha with nothing but her wit. That is not a girl who hides. That is the Luna I saw when no one else could." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you, Lyra, not for the title you hold, but for the heart that you are. I love your quiet strength. I love your compassion that you mistake for weakness. I love the way you see the world in details the rest of us miss." Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of release, of a burden finally laid down. "And I love you, Kael," she breathed, the words a confession and a vow. "I love the man who was brave enough to kneel. I love the leader who is strong enough to follow when it is right. I love you for seeing me." Their first kiss was not a claiming, but a discovery. It was tender and slow, a gentle exploration of this new, profound truth between them. It was the silent language of the heart finally given voice. It tasted of truth and of a future unchained from the past. That night, in the quiet of his chambers, their coming together was a natural extension of the emotional intimacy they had forged. It was a conversation without words, a tender and consuming exploration of each other. There was no hesitation, only a reverent curiosity, a learning of landscapes both physical and emotional. It was not the mating of an alpha and his omega to seal a bond. It was the union of Kael and Lyra, two souls who had wandered in their own loneliness, finally finding their home in one another. Afterward, wrapped in the warmth of each other and the quiet of the night, they spoke of the future, not as a duty, but as a shared dream. They spoke of a pack where strength was measured in compassion as well as courage, where the value of a member was not solely in their rank but in their contribution to the whole. Lying in his arms, her head on his chest, Lyra felt the last of her doubts dissolve. She was not an imposter in his bed. She was his partner, his love, his equal. The chosen had become the cherished, and in the quiet rhythm of his heart beneath her ear, she knew this was where she was always meant to be. A full cycle of seasons had turned since the night that shattered a tradition and built a new world in its place. The Silvermane pack gathering was once again upon them, the great hall adorned with the same banners, the air humming with the same undercurrent of anticipation. Yet nothing was the same. Kael stood at the head of the hall, his posture not one of rigid duty, but of easy authority. By his side, Lyra did not occupy a forgotten corner or a seat of token respect. She stood as his equal, her presence a quiet, unassailable force. The simple elegance of her gown did not seek to compete with the finery around it. It complemented it, much like her leadership complemented his. The faint earthy scent of rain and parchment that had once been dismissed now carried the weight of Aluna's command. The pack members who approached them did so with genuine deference, their eyes reflecting not mockery or pity, but respect earned through a year of her compassionate action and unshakable integrity. The test, as it inevitably did, came from outside their borders. A visiting alpha, born from the Stoneclaw pack, a man known for his bluntness and old-world views, observed the court with a critical eye. His gaze lingered on Lyra, not with admiration, but with a dismissive curiosity. During a lull in the formalities, his voice, gravelly and loud, cut through the congenial atmosphere. "It is a curious strategy," Kael Borin remarked, swirling the wine in his goblet. "Choosing Aluna for her gentle qualities. One wonders if the Silvermane pack has traded its fangs for a soothing touch." The implication was clear, a veiled insult questioning their strength and her worth. A tense silence fell. All eyes flicked to Kael, awaiting the alpha's sharp retort. But it was Lyra who moved. She took a single, graceful step forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, yet it carried to every corner of the hall with a crystalline clarity that demanded attention. "A pack with only fangs, Alpha Borin, knows only how to bite," she said, her tone even and devoid of malice, yet laced with an undeniable steel. "It does not know how to build, or to heal, or to nurture the bonds that ensure it does not tear itself apart from within. A soothing touch can steady a nervous hand, and a steady hand guides the fangs to strike. True, and only when necessary. Do you not agree?" The metaphor was perfect. It was a defense that was also a lesson, delivered with a poise that left no room for argument. Borin was stunned into silence, his mouth slightly agape. He had expected a flustered omega or a protective alpha. He had not expected Aluna. He offered a curt, grudging nod of concession, the conversation around them resuming with a renewed, respectful energy directed at her. Kael looked at her, his heart swelling with a pride so profound it felt like a physical warmth in his chest. She had not needed his protection. She had defended their shared vision, their pack, with nothing but the sharpness of her mind and the strength of her conviction. Later, as the moon rose high and cast its silver light through the tall windows, the celebration reached its peak. The music was sweeter, the laughter more genuine, the unity in the hall a tangible thing. Kael felt the rightness of it all settle deep into his soul. This was the pack he was meant to lead. This was the partner he was meant to lead with. He turned to Lyra, taking both of her hands in his. The crowd, sensing the significance of the moment, quieted once more. This time, the silence was not one of shock, but of witness. "Lyra," he began, his voice thick with emotion, meant for her, but heard by all. A year ago, I made a choice before this pact. I chose you. It was the first decision I made entirely as the man I wanted to be, not the alpha I was told to be. He squeezed her hands, his eyes holding hers, seeing the incredible journey they had shared reflected in her gray depths. They thought I chose a rejected Omega, but I did not. I chose a woman of immense strength. I chose a heart of boundless compassion. I chose a wisdom that sees the whole world where others see only their own reflection. I chose my Luna. I chose my partner. I chose the love of my life. Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of a happiness so hard-won and so complete it could only overflow. That choice was not a single moment, he continued, his voice growing stronger, ringing with a vow. It is a promise I must renew every day, and I do. Before our pact, before the moon that witnessed our beginning, I choose you again. I will choose you every morning I wake, and every night before I sleep. I will choose you in times of peace and in times of challenge. I will choose you until my very last breath, and I will consider my life a magnificent success for having been blessed to do so. He did not kneel this time. He stood with her, as her equal, and drew her into an embrace that was both tender and triumphant. The hall erupted into not gasps, but into cheers and applause, a joyful thunderous approval that shook the very foundations of the manor. As they held each other, the noise of the pack faded into a distant hum. They were not just an Alpha and his Luna. They were Kael and Lyra, two souls who had found their home in one another. Their love had been tested by fire and hardened into the unbreakable core of a new era for their pack. The story that began with a shocking choice ended, not with a challenge, but with a covenant, renewed and everlasting. The end.